Welcome again to this edition of Meet the Candidates. I'm David Nicholas with you here on WCMU. We are speaking with all of our guests virtually, joined this time by Sarah Schultz. She is the Democratic candidate for the 98th House District race in the state of Michigan, the challenger in that race. Congratulations on the win in the August primary. And in our first moment or two, tell us a little bit about you, your background and experience you bring to the campaign.
Thank you, David. It's really great to see you again. A little bit about me. So I am actually running for this seat for the second time. I ran in 2018. This is the second time I've had the pleasure of being on this program. And one thing that is important to know is that I ran in 2018 and I did not win, but I came very close to winning and just never stopped. So the other night someone said, "What made you put your hat in the ring in 2020? My answer was, I never took my hat out of the ring. And I just think it's going to take more than one election cycle to make the kind of history we're looking to make in the 98th. So I'm a political candidate, but mostly I'm just a regular person who lives in Midland. I'm a vice president for a nonprofit that works to end the dropout crisis in urban schools all around the country. I do human resource work at that organization for our over 5,000 workers. And I've been there for a good long time with about 20, a team and a department of 20 folks who do that work with me and who I get to lead every day. I am originally from Flint, Michigan. That's where I was born and raised. My dad was an auto worker. He's a retired auto worker. So was my grandfather and great grandfather. My mom was a preschool teacher there in Flint. And I live in Midland. I live there with my husband, who is a public school teacher, and my two kids who are both in middle school. And I'm running just because I think it's critical that our district has representation that is focused on the issues that matter to the people of our district rather than the partisan fighting and polarized politics that seems to dictate our airwaves and our internet these days. And I think our state deserves the same. And so we're pulling out all the stops and trying to talk to as many folks as we can in this election cycle to really understand what the issues are that matter to people when they put their heads on their pillow at night, so that when I do get elected in just a couple of weeks and go to Lansing in January, I can be the best representative I can be, because I think that title, representative, is also a job description, and inherent in that is really understanding our community and listening to everyone.
Looking at those issues then, pardon me, I didn't mean to cut you off, then as we look then specifically at some of those issues, what have the voters told you? What do you, as the challenging candidate in this race, identify as the primary issues for this campaign in the run-up to November?
Yeah, so, we've been listening. My team and I have been listening and having conversations with hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people since the 2018 campaign. And the issues that matter have remained fairly constant, except for two of the most recent things that have happened to our world and our community. And I'll get to that in a second. But the top issues tend to be strong schools and education, good jobs, and making sure that people have the ability to plan for the future and the security to do the things that they need to do and live their best lives to their fullest potential. And I think I call strong communities, and by that I mean not only infrastructure, roads and Wi-Fi access, and of course now dams is an issue that comes to the top, but also just healthy communities when it comes to having the access to prescription drugs that folks need every day to live and to survive, that are not so costly that they're making choices between whether or not they can afford their insulin or afford their rent. And healthy communities also has to do with that safety net that exists and needs to be strengthened in our communities so that when individuals and families are falling on hard times, they can turn to things that they need from their community to lift them up. And healthy communities also is a community in which you have healthy interactions with people, right? Regardless of political party, where you have the ability for folks to come together even over differences and find the common ground that's really required in order to make progress and good change. And the two things that I mentioned before that sort of sprung up in this campaign that have risen to the top of the list and actually impact so many other things are, of course, COVID. COVID obviously is top of mind for so many people as individuals thinking about themselves and their loved ones from a health perspective and also as businesses. But I would say COVID really has exemplified and highlighted all of the values and all of the issues that have been on top of mind forever, right? So when we think about things like schools that I mentioned before and the necessity to have strong schools, now we see through the lens of COVID how important that is and how really critical the gap in education is when we look at the ability for a school to provide devices for students to learn from home or access to Wi-Fi. When we look at healthcare, right, and the ability to have access for healthcare has always been an issue that's been top of mind, but through the lens of COVID, we see people just so worried about the increasing unemployment rate and what that might mean to whether or not they can continue to have health insurance. And I have a friend whose doctor told her to go get a COVID test, and her very first response, because she doesn't have health insurance, was, how much is it going to cost me? And then if you look through the lens of COVID at jobs, good jobs, we see things like a living wage that we've been talking about as a core value on this campaign for years, really be exemplified during COVID when you have grocery store workers and hospital workers and school paraprofessionals working minimum wage jobs, literally putting themselves in danger every day during this virus to interact with the community. And we really need to be able to support those folks to be able to have a life from the wages that they're making through full-time jobs, especially during the pandemic. And the last thing, though, that kind of changed a lot about this campaign, of course, was the issue with the flooding and the dam failures that happened back in May. I spend half my time or more talking with flood survivors. My house was damaged in the flood. It's still, we still don't have a kitchen. My parents' home was damaged in the flood and was completely gutted. He doesn't have a kitchen or a furnace or a hot water heater. And there are hundreds of other people in our community that are suffering from those same things. And so, of course, one of the main issues that I talk about with the folks of my community all the time is the flood, is the dam failure, and things like, how do we hold the people responsible, accountable for what they did and the negligence that was allowed to happen for so many years? How do we make sure it never happens again in our community and in Michigan? And how do we rebuild both individual homes from folks, especially folks who I know who are living currently in campers, and they're trying to fortify those campers with insulation and bales of hay for the winter as they're trying to work on rebuilding their homes. But also, how do we rebuild our communities, our municipalities, our roads, our bridges, our downtowns, and our lakes? So it's a whole array of issues that definitely come up. Some of them are very standard and consistent for these years that we've been having these conversations. Some of them are very recent, recently put on the top of the list, and they are all really interconnected. So those are the issues.
About 3 minutes left with you, Sarah. We were speaking with Sarah Schultz. She is the Democratic candidate for the 98th House District race. If we look then back to, as you said, schools, jobs, communities, and the overarching impact of COVID, and then the 500-year flood event earlier this year, does it change the priority of how, or some of the specifics as to how you would deal with your direct proposals on dealing with these issues if we look at them outside of the flood, outside of COVID, or we can't ignore that, looking at obviously the specifics? How does it shape the priority and the specifics that you would address in these issues?
I appreciate that question, David, so much. So, like I mentioned, I think that COVID doesn't change the priorities, right? Because all the priorities are the same, and COVID has highlighted each of them and given us in stark relief real life impact, a view into the real life impact of all of those issues. But I would say that top of my list has always been education, making sure that our schools are strong. And by that, I mean our teachers are respected and resourced, and that the schools are resourced with the types of equipment and personnel that our students and our teachers need to be successful, and that they're equipped with things like Wi-Fi access, and students have the ability to learn from whatever environment we need to put them in, come what may, things like COVID or whatever. But I will say that, I will not go to Lansing and not learn from the cautionary tale that we lived through back in May when those dams broke. And to know that this state has actually thousands of dams that are owned by private owners. And our state actually does not have a very concise and robust system to be able to know what the status of those dams are, which ones need to be repaired, and whether or not those owners are equipped to be able to, both repair those dams and or help to recover the damages that are caused when those dams fail. I think there's a lot we can do related to infrastructure connected to dams and waters, and across the state. And I just, that is a new priority for me. The accountability there, the infrastructure changes we need to make in order to make sure it never happens again, and to be able to help support those families who are still rebuilding. So that's a top priority for me.
Less than half a minute, but we wanted to give you the chance to leave the voters with the final message as they get set to go to the polls. What would that message be?
Well, thank you, David. My campaign has been centered around people and around conversation since the very beginning. My campaign color is purple. That's the combination of red and blue, and a symbol and an idea that we can find common ground among folks at different places on the political spectrum. And when you vote for me, you're voting for someone who's not concerned about party politics or people in power. You're voting for someone who's only concerned about the people of this district and will only go to Lansing to fight for you.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us and to the voters in District 98. Thanks very much again for the time. Stay safe and good luck with the rest of the campaign.
Awesome. Thank you, David. I appreciate your time.
We've been speaking with Sarah Schultz, the Democratic candidate for the 98th House District race. All qualifying candidates for these races in Michigan were invited to participate in our series. We hope you will join us again, and please do remember to get out and exercise your right to vote on Tuesday, November 3rd.